What if letting go was the only real way forward? In a world addicted to control, where goals are chased with clenched fists and hearts are armored with expectations, we find ourselves exhausted. The modern psyche is burning out, anxious, overstimulated, and spiritually starved. Recent studies show that over 75% of people report chronic stress, and nearly 1 in 3 Americans struggle with anxiety on a regular basis. The common denominator? Control. The desire to manage, predict, and dominate every aspect of life. But Carl Jung knew something we have long forgotten. Transformation begins not in control, but in surrender. In his work with the unconscious, Jung observed that when the ego loosens its grip, something extraordinary happens. A hidden force, what he called the self, emerges from the depths, guiding us toward wholeness. Yet we resist this process, because to let go is to die, in a sense. The death of who we think we are, the death of the illusion that we are in charge. But behind that death is a rebirth, unexpected, mysterious, and liberating. This is the paradox of letting go. When you stop chasing, what you seek begins to move toward you. In this episode, we will explore that strange truth, not as a motivational cliché, but as a psychic law rooted in the deepest layers of the soul. We'll enter the psyche's inner chambers, where the ego wrestles with fear, where the shadow lives, and where, if we are brave enough to stop controlling, something larger than us can begin to act. We'll begin with the illusion of control, move through the silent power of surrender, and arrive at a radical truth. What you're looking for is already looking for you, but only if you dare to release your grip. Let's begin. The illusion of control. From the moment we are born, we are taught to strive, to aim high, to take charge. The world rewards those who seem to be in control of their time, their emotions, their future. Control becomes not just a habit, but an identity. But beneath that identity, a quieter truth stirs. Carl Jung observed that the ego, our conscious sense of self, naturally wants to govern everything it touches. It wants certainty, definition, and mastery. It wants to hold the reins. This tendency isn't wrong, it's simply what the ego does. But what happens when the ego forgets that it is not the whole of who we are? We begin to suffer. The ego's hunger for control is a mask, a compensation. Often it's fear in disguise, fear of the unknown, fear of chaos, fear of the parts of ourselves we cannot understand or predict. And so we micromanage life. We overthink, overplan, and overperform, believing that if we just try hard enough, we'll finally feel safe. But this illusion creates a prison. We become trapped in cycles of anxiety, perfectionism, and burnout. We try to force relationships to work, force careers to succeed, force ourselves to always do more. But the more we push, the more elusive peace becomes. Jung compared the ego to a spotlight in a vast, dark room. It can illuminate, yes, but it sees only what it shines upon. The unconscious, the hidden realm of instinct, intuition, archetype, is where the deeper truths reside. And when the ego tries to dominate this vast interior world, it disturbs the balance of the psyche. Consider the archetype of the wounded warrior. This is the part of us that fights endlessly, believing that only through effort and vigilance can it find love or success. But beneath that armor lies exhaustion. The warrior becomes a slave to its own battle, unable to rest, unable to trust. This is what happens when control becomes compulsive. What we often don't see is that this obsessive need to control is a defense mechanism. It keeps us from feeling helpless. It keeps us from facing the reality that much of life, our emotions, our relationships, our destiny, is not fully in our hands. Jung would say, this is where individuation begins. The journey toward wholeness doesn't begin with more control. It begins with the humility to admit that control is limited. that the ego, for all its striving, is not the master of the house. And yet the paradox remains: when we let go of control, life doesn't fall apart. Often it begins to reorganize in ways we could never have designed ourselves. Synchronicities appear, new paths unfold. Healing begins where effort ends. This doesn't mean we abandon responsibility or become passive. Letting go is not about apathy, it's about trust. Trusting that there is an intelligence within you, older, wiser, more connected to the truth of your being, that knows the way. This chapter is a call to question the myth of control, to step back from the compulsive need to manage everything and ask, what am I really afraid of? Because sometimes the thing we fear the most is not chaos, it's freedom. If you feel like you're always trying to control everything, subscribe to this channel. We dive deeper than the surface, and you're not alone in this. Detachment as an act of courage. To let go is not to give up, it is to step into a deeper form of power. We often confuse detachment with indifference, but in the language of the soul, detachment is not cold. It is warm, alive, and deeply conscious. It is the courage to say, I no longer need to control this in order to trust it. Carl Jung believed that true transformation begins when the ego loosens its grip, and it takes great courage to do so. Because detachment means surrendering our illusion of control and trusting the unknown. It means allowing space for something greater than our personal will to enter the conversation. This is not weakness, this is initiation. In many spiritual traditions, the path to awakening begins with renunciation, not of life, but of the ego's need to dominate it. In Taoism, the concept of Wu Wei, non-action or effortless action, describes a way of being that flows in harmony with the Tao, the natural order of things. You do not force the river, you move with it. This too is the way of the psyche. When we detach from outcome, we allow the unconscious to speak. Jung observed that the self, the central archetype of wholeness, often speaks in symbols, dreams, synchronicities. But when we're obsessed with control, we miss these messages. We are so busy managing the plot that we forget we're also characters in a much deeper story, one written not just by us, but by something ancient and intelligent within us. To detach is to say, I trust that there is meaning, even if I cannot see it yet. This kind of trust requires faith in the invisible, and that is no small thing. Imagine a person holding onto a vine above a canyon. Their arms are tired, the vine is fraying, but they refuse to let go because they don't know what lies below. What they don't see is that there's a soft river just beneath them, ready to carry them forward. Detachment is the moment they let go, not out of despair, but out of trust. And that trust opens a new space. Emotionally, this shift is profound. When you detach from needing someone to love you a certain way, you become more present in that love. When you detach from the outcome of your work, creativity flows more freely. When you detach from needing life to obey your plans, life begins to surprise you. This is the mystery. The moment you release control, life doesn't become worse. It becomes more real. Jung saw this as a psychic reorientation, from ego-centeredness to self-centeredness. Not selfishness, but alignment with the deeper, transpersonal core of your being. It is this self that knows your direction, not as a plan, but as a calling. The self doesn't push, it pulls, it invites. But we can only hear that invitation when we stop shouting over it with our own demands. This chapter is not a call to laziness or inaction, it is a call to courage. Because detachment isn't easy, it's terrifying. It feels like death, and in a way it is. The death of certainty, the death of identity, the death of the old self. But only in that death does something new emerge. So the question becomes, what are you willing to release in order to be led by something greater? Are you willing to not know, to be vulnerable, to let the mystery have its way with you? If this resonates with something deep inside you, turn on notifications. We explore the inner life like no one else. Breaking the cycle. When the ego surrenders, at some point in life, quietly or with great force, the ego begins to break. The illusion of control cracks. The carefully constructed identity no longer holds. The goals we chased don't satisfy us. The relationships we clung to fall apart. Something collapses, and in that collapse, something ancient begins to stir. Carl Jung knew this moment well. He called it a crisis of individuation, the breaking of the ego's illusion that it is the master of the psyche. And while the modern world views such a breakdown as failure, Jung saw it as sacred, a doorway, a turning point. When the ego finally surrenders, it doesn't die, it transforms. This is not the kind of surrender that comes from defeat, but the kind that comes from wisdom. It is the moment when we say, "I've done all I can from the level of my mind." Now something deeper must take the lead. Often, this surrender only comes after we've exhausted every tactic of control, after we've tried to fix, manage, chase, and force our way into peace, and failed. And it's in that failure that the real work begins. The ego, like a loyal but overburdened servant, begins to release its grip. It realizes it was never meant to carry the full weight of our lives. It was never meant to be the architect of our healing or the orchestrator of destiny. Jung often said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that process requires surrender, because to see the shadow, to face the parts of ourselves we've denied, requires humility. The kind of humility that only comes when the ego has softened. Real transformation is not linear, it is cyclical, it comes in waves, and in those moments when everything falls apart, we are not being punished, we are being invited. Invited to move from will to wisdom, from effort to essence. This is the paradox. The breakdown is not the end, it is the beginning. Many people who experience profound growth, whether in healing, creativity, or love, report that it came after they gave up trying, after they stopped fixing themselves and simply sat with their pain, after they let go of the timeline, the technique, the expectation, and suddenly something shifted. A new insight arrived, a relationship mended, a dream returned. Not because they controlled it, but because they surrendered to it. In depth psychology, this is the turning point, when the unconscious begins to rise, not as chaos, but as guidance. Archetypes emerge, symbols speak, synchronicities appear, and we realize we are not alone. The self has always been there waiting. The ego was never the villain. It was simply afraid. It tried to protect us in the only way it knew how, by controlling. But now it learns to bow, to listen, to serve something larger. And this is where freedom begins. If this shift feels familiar, if you've tasted surrender and want to understand its meaning, subscribe and explore these deeper layers with us. The healing power of letting go. Healing doesn't always come through effort. Sometimes it comes when we stop trying to heal. Letting go is not a passive resignation. It is an active, sacred release. A moment when the soul whispers, "I'm done fighting this. I'm ready to feel what's true." Carl Jung understood healing not as fixing, but as integration. And integration cannot happen through force. It happens through allowance, through creating space for what has long been suppressed to finally speak. Most of us carry wounds that we try to manage. We numb them with distraction, overanalyze them with intellect, or try to bury them under productivity. But the soul does not forget. What is unresolved within us continues to call out, not to punish us, but to be witnessed. Letting go is the moment we stop silencing that voice. In relationships, we often try to control the other. We want them to change, to respond the way we need, to love us how we imagined. But true connection only arises when we release those expectations. When we stop needing to be loved a certain way and start allowing the other to be who they are. This act of letting go opens space for authenticity, and from that space, something deeper can emerge. Connection, not as control, but as communion. In trauma healing, this truth is even more profound. Many people try to conquer their trauma as if it were an enemy. But trauma is not something to be defeated. It is something to be felt, held, and understood. When we stop trying to control the healing process and begin to listen to the body, to the emotions, to the dreams, healing begins. Not because we made it happen, but because we stopped resisting it. Letting go allows the unconscious to do its work. Jung spoke often of the psyche's self-regulating nature. Just as the body heals a wound when left alone, the soul knows how to mend if we stop interfering. But letting go requires trust. Trust that you are not broken, that you are not behind, that your pain has meaning, even if you don't yet understand it. Trust that your inner world is intelligent, and that by softening your grip, you create conditions for that intelligence to move. This is not a one-time act. It is a practice. Letting go happens moment by moment. When the thoughts come, when the fear returns, when the urge to fix arises, you return to trust. You return to the breath, to the present, to the self. And little by little, you begin to notice. You feel lighter. Not because the pain vanished, but because it no longer defines you. It no longer controls your nervous system. You've created space between you and the wound. And in that space, life returns. Letting go is not the end of healing. It is its beginning. If you're on a healing journey and feel the call to trust the process, subscribe. We walk this path together, step by step. The silent path of the self. There is a voice inside you that doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg for attention. It waits. It watches. And when the ego finally quiets down, it speaks. This is the voice of the self, the deep, central core of your psyche. Not your personality, not your thoughts or feelings, but the ancient guiding presence within you that has always known the way. Carl Jung described the self as both the center and the totality of the psyche. It is not a goal to be reached, but a truth to be remembered. And yet we often spend decades searching for what was never lost, only buried. The self doesn't rush, it doesn't force. It unfolds in silence, in stillness, in surrender. This is why letting go is so essential. The ego is loud. It wants results, answers, guarantees. But the self emerges in the absence of noise. It speaks in dreams, symbols, and synchronicities. It moves like water, never in a straight line, but always with purpose. To follow the self is to walk a different kind of path. It's not about climbing a ladder or achieving a title. It's about descent into depth, into mystery, into the parts of you you've long ignored. It's the moment you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What is life asking of me?" The self often leads us through darkness, through loss, uncertainty, solitude, not to punish us, but to initiate us. Just as the phoenix must burn before it can rise, we too must pass through a kind of inner death. The death of who we thought we were, the death of who others told us to be. In that sacred death, the real begins to emerge. The silent path of the self is not glamorous. It doesn't always make sense to the outside world. It may mean letting go of people, of dreams, of control. But what you receive in return is incomparable. Authenticity, clarity, inner peace. You begin to live from a deeper place, not reactive, but responsive. Not seeking, but listening. You no longer chase life, you collaborate with it. And this is the ultimate paradox of letting go. When you stop grasping, what is truly meant for you begins to arrive, quietly, organically, without struggle. This is not magic. This is the design of the soul. Jung would say that the self is both your origin and your destiny. It is who you were before the world told you who to be, and who you will become if you dare to remember. So ask yourself, am I ready to listen to the voice that speaks in silence? Can I trust that my wholeness does not come from doing, but from being? If you long to walk this quieter, deeper path, subscribe and stay close. This is a journey of soul, and you don't have to walk it alone. Letting go, the first step toward the real. Letting go is not a loss. It is a return to the natural rhythm of the psyche, a return to the self. In a culture obsessed with striving, detachment feels radical. But Carl Jung reminded us that healing, love, creativity, and even destiny emerge not through force, but through surrender. You've seen it in your own life. The love that arrived when you stopped chasing, the idea that came when you finally rested, the peace that emerged when you no longer had the answers. This is not weakness, this is wisdom. Letting go does not mean becoming passive. It means recognizing that the ego was never meant to carry everything alone, that your pain, your path, your becoming are part of something larger than your conscious mind. You are not just your thoughts, you are not just your trauma, you are not just your roles or failures. You are a soul on a journey toward integration. And the moment you release your grip, the moment you exhale, something ancient begins to breathe through you. This is the paradox. When you stop caring in the way the ego demands, life begins to respond to you in the language of the soul.